Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are at. I hope you're having a fantastic day. It's SoulSaint here, and we got some big news about some upcoming duo champions that you're going to be able to get your hands on in the not-too-distant future. So, right now, I have on the screen Wight Queen Ankora. Yes, you heard that right. Wight Queen Ankora. We also have, I believe, her associated duo champion partner, whatever you want to call it, Wight King Narses. And they're both going to be available to us in the not-too-distant future. I'm going to go ahead and say this now and ahead of time. I believe Wight Queen Ankora is the one that's going to be in the next upcoming Fragment event. So I think this is going to be kind of like similar to like your Fragment Fusion. This is going to be a really good champion. Actually, I think these both of them together are going to be kind of problematic. As for Wight King Narses, there has been no official announcements about how his release is going to be. But to be honest with you, the last time we had a partner champion was very... interesting because we had like Kaja and Timid, I believe the most recent ones were, and they associated Kaja alongside Timid's fusion, but she was available by progressing through, I believe it was a Deck of Fate event. So there might be something around the lines of him being approached in that same way, or he may just be added to the Void pool for us to use. Now, we're going to break down their kit, and we're going to talk about whether or not these champions are worth going for, and where would they be best suited at. And then on top of that, some other extra additional caveats and maybe some hypotheticals about what we can expect going into the future, okay? So with that being said, Wight Queen Ankora is a Knights Revenant legendary support champion, who is, in the true definition, a really big support. When I first initially read her kit, and I did read it before this recording, kind of screams like it's going to be a big deal. So let's break it down. Her A1 is called Necrobolt. It attacks one enemy, has a 30% chance of decreasing the cooldown of a random ally skill by 2 turns, except this champion, so it's not going to be her. If Wight King Narses is on the same team and has any skills on cooldown, it's going to guarantee his being decreased, right? And then if he is on the same team, but he has no abilities that are on cooldown, then it decreases the cooldown of a random ally skill by 2 turns, except this champion. So you can look forward to, basically, no matter what, you're going to get the value of that cooldown reduction on her A1. You heard that right, her A1. If the skill is on, if the cooldown of the skill is fully reset, it heals that champion by 10% of Ankora's maximum HP. So you can scale that healing very, very well. Just keep that in mind. Now, is this OP? I kind of want to say just straight up off the gate, with or without Narses, yes. Yes. Now, it is a 30% chance, which can be booked up to a 50% chance. I think that with King Narses on the team, I think that's a little bit more, the way I'm reading this or interpreting this is it's actually a little bit more guaranteed. Whereas like without him, it looks like you're at a chance proc. So I'm not entirely sure about that, but regardless, that's a really strong, getting reset in general in this game is actually very, very strong, just so you guys are aware. If you're not. Shield of Amaria, I'm not sure if I'm going to say this one right, but the A2 is on a 4-turn cooldown, bookable down to a 3-turn cooldown, which is pretty much a good reference point for on average. It removes all debuffs from all allies and places a shield buff on them equal to 25% of this champion's HP, so it's scalable. If Narses, her duo partner, is on the same team, it places a 25% strengthen buff on all allies for 2 turns. Then fills the turn meters of all allies by 10%. So really good combination behind having Narses on the same team as Ankora, from what I'm reading. The value of a team-wide debuff cleanse, as well as providing a shield, and then if you have Narses on the team, strengthen, makes her kit very valuable. Cleanse in general is really nice. Cooldown reduction is really, really nice. So far, 2 big W's, right? Rise My Love is a 5-turn cooldown, which is her A3. Revives a dead ally, so it's a single target ally revive, with 50% HP and 75% turn meter. That's kind of very similar to, I would say, the likeness of like Pythion, but on a more single target aspect. But it does reset the cooldown of the revived ally skills. Think Godseeker and Neri in terms of like cooldown reduction. If the target is Narses himself, the duo partner, it'll revive them with 100% turn meter and 75% HP instead. And then after the revival, it decreases the turn meter of all enemies by 10%. So not only are you providing support, but you're also providing control on the enemy side from a turn meter standpoint. So you can technically benefit from the bounce back, but also, you know, cripple the enemy so that'll give you a little bit more breathing room to play with. And that's actually a big deal, believe it or not. Especially in PvP. Keep that in mind, PvP being a big conversation piece so far. If Wight King Narses is revived, it decreases the turn meter of all enemies by 20% instead. This effect cannot be resisted, which means that it doesn't matter how much accuracy you put on this champion, it's gonna go through instead, you know? Now, this is bookable down to a 3-turn cooldown as well, which is pretty much your average sweet spot for a legendary, so that's kind of on par. So we have a revive with a turn meter increase or turn meter reduction on the enemy, and then making it irresistible, a W. So we got 3 good abilities so far. Her entire kit screams really, really good, right? Now, let's get down to the passive. Queen Consort. It does have a 3-turn cooldown, which means there is a passive, an active effect or some kind of trigger effect that can happen. But I do see there that there are books, and I'm going to disappear here for a second so you can see it. There are bookable downs, so if it's on a 3-turn cooldown at base, and you have 3 cooldowns that you can reduce on the booking side of things, that means that the cooldown is, what, 0? Uh-oh. Quick math here. Let's see here. It says, whenever an enemy tries to place a fear, true fear, freeze, provoke, sleep, stun, or petrification debuff on the ally with the highest crit damage, you instead transfer those debuffs to this champion instead. Fills the turn meter of this champion by 50% if this champion misses their turn due to one of these debuffs. So, let's paint the hypothetical. Narses is a damage dealer, right? I'm going to assume so. From what I remember reading, he's going to actually be a pretty strong DPS. He could be your highest crit damage champion, right? And then you're going through the battle. Maybe you're fighting against a Mithrala, or you're fighting against someone who could provide freeze, like maybe your Carl. All my homies love you, Carl. Or someone who could provide stun. Shout out to Ragash, you know. And the moment that happens, Ankora with Narses would be like, all right, Narses, instead of you taking that, I'll take that stun, and then you can continue to keep going. That's a really good passive. That basically eliminates, and a lot of like PvP content in a sense is just, you're doing everything you can to enable your DPS to either survive and get their turn, or to go first and get their turn. So at the end of the day, the objective is to make sure that they can get their turn and not be hindered to a point where they can't do their job, which is to clear out the enemy team, right? So Queen Consort is actually a really good passive for that. Fills the turn meter of this champion by 50%, though, if they miss a turn. So, Ankora, when she takes those debuffs, if she so happens to lose her turn from that provoke, from that sleep, that stun, or whatever is there, then she automatically boosts up by another 50% to maybe get her turn again so that she can kind of continue the ball and get the ball rolling for your team to be enhanced yet again. So, very, very strong. At the start of this champion's turn, it also removes any fear, true fear, freeze, provoke, sleep, stun, or petrification debuff, if Narses is on the same team. So in that same hypothetical that we were talking about, if we do take Narciss's debuffs and we place on her, when she does get her turn, she doesn't lose it anyway. So it's a big value there in terms of them being a really good combination, a really good synergy so far. I do like the way that this duo from the support side of things, it sounds very solid to me, if you guys want my opinion. If there are multiple champions on the team with this skill, only one will activate. So if there's 2 Ankoras, for example, which could be possible, she may be a permanent addition to the champion pool, which, as far as I'm assuming, she's not an exclusive or a time-limited champion, so there is going to be multiple ways to get her. The first one's going to be a fusion. I believe this one, like it was noted to us, is going to be a fragment event, so keep that in mind. Then, last but not least, her aura. Increase ally speed in all battles by your standard 19%. Solid, not top of the line, not under the line, but solid. You're pretty much right there at what I would say is very consistent with other champions. Like, for example, my free-to-play account has the Deacon right now, which is also 19%. So it's on pace with that. So solid, not over the top, but still pretty good nevertheless. So I think overall, I view this champion as a hard W, man. This is really, really good. If the king side of this duo is really, really good, I think this champion could actually be meta-defining. And that's just based off of Ankora's kit alone. So let's go down to his kit, and we can take a look at what he's got going on. Now, this one's a little bit more different. This champion is a legendary Void HP champion as a part of the Knights Revenant as well. So I think that kind of automatically just makes our perspective of this a lot more stricter. So when I look at Voids, I want these Voids to have them. They need to matter because there are so many other Voids in this game that have very, very strong potential. They're amongst the meta. I know I hate to do this to you guys, but from a PvP standpoint, you got Mariska and Terrace, who are basically that's the standard in terms of like what's considered top end. But then you also have some other support champions and other DPS champions that are solid, like think PvE for Kryzia, or think PvP in terms of like Necrit as a support champion, or Sify, for example. You know, like there's a lot of comparisons that we're gonna make. And as Void, I'm a lot more. If you're gonna be a Void, you need to be worth it, right? We don't want to dilute that pool because we want to get the really, really good champions, and we're gonna get a Void champion, right? So the bias lenses are on. We are going to be very strict about this guy, right? So with that being said, White King Narses, or Narses, I'm not actually sure how we pronounce it. I like Narses because he sounds like he's like, you know, he's got that like Egyptian vibe. Someone mentioned that earlier before we started this recording. Yeah, he kind of gives that like aesthetic kingly, so we're going to call him Narses for now. Corruption Scepter attacks one enemy, has a 30% chance of randomly increasing the cooldown of one of the target's skills by 2 turns. Huge! Very huge. And the reason why is that that's basically like a built-in lockout. This effect cannot be resisted if White Queen and Ankora is on the same team, meaning you do not have to worry about building accuracy into them. Huge! Bookable to give you an additional 20%, which means it's a 50-50. The flip of the coin makes them very strong, but also not overpowered and out of touch to a point where it's unreachable. And it's the new Terrace or the new Mariska, right? Because I am of the opinion those champions do need to be nerfed. So this kind of brings it just slightly maybe below that or maybe on par with something like that. But I do think that that's a very, very strong A1. Just like Ankora's kid herself. Desecration Blast, which is her A2, is a 4-turn cooldown. Attacks all enemies. That's a W. Can be a W. It can be also punished too. Will ignore 25% of the target's defense. Places an extra hit on targets under shield or strengthen buffs. Huh? So you have an AoE. Ignore 25% of the target's debuff. That's a savage. Just think about that from a set bonus. That's savage. Places an extra hit on targets under shield or strengthen, which means it hits an additional time. Damage inflicted by this skill cannot be decreased by enemy passive skills or masteries except by the passive skills of bosses. Damage inflicted by this skill cannot be increased by either this champion's masteries or ally passive skills except when attacking bosses. The only time I ever remember reading this verbiage, and it's very funny because the irony of it, was when I got Quintus. And what does that mean? So, like, if you're familiar with, like, Quintus's output, some people are going to say in favor of it. I've actually been noticing more and more people champion Quintus than the initial negative perspective of it, which is how hard is it to get him. And the champions you need to do that are just substantially better. And that argument still is visible. But from a damage outputs perspective, let's put it into perspective here in a sense. Terrace, who is not only strong from a damage standpoint, but one of the biggest key aspects about him is that he also technically builds into survival stats. So he's an HP scaling type champion, right? Having a tanky build benefits him from a damage outlet, but also from a survivability standpoint. And that's before we even talk about the passive that basically reduces the amount of output that you can give him just straight out. I think he ignores or he mitigates a percentage of the damage he takes regardless, right? This right here basically means I don't care about that passive. That passive ain't stopping the damage that's coming through. And that could be a very, very strong way to address someone like Terrace, right? So, with that being said, it is bookable down to a 3-turn cooldown, which is a W. The damage scaling from a book also will attest to his capability of being able to put more output, so that could be very interesting. Desecration Blast could be something very interesting for meta damage on the top end for PvP. I feel like. We'll have to see. Of course, we have to see multipliers and all that, and that'll really determine whether or not this champion is going to be worth it. Spirits, Claim You, which is his A3. It's a 5-turn cooldown at base, but it is bookable down to a 4-turn cooldown, so it's interesting. It's 4. Attacks one enemy 2 times, which is good. Increases the damage inflicted with this skill by 10% for each buff on the target, stacking up to a total of 50%. And then an additional 10% for each buff on this champion. So you could technically, if you have 5 buffs or something around those lines on yourself or on top of that with the champion that you're attacking, you could scale up to 100% worth of damage, which is really, really huge. If this attack kills a target under 3 or more buffs, places a block revive debuff, which is very strong in some of today's annoying meta. When we're talking about Mariska, you know, her revive comes from her passive. If you're placing a block revive, it doesn't matter when her passive triggers, they ain't gonna come back, right? Same thing with one of the more annoying champions. You love to have him, you hate to fight him, is Sun Wukong, who constantly bounces back every 3 turns anyway. So if you have a block revive on him, you ain't got to worry about that champion no more, which is a great way to do it. That's why a Nithway exists in some of the upper echelon PvP meta comps. You know, they actually have teams designed that allow his block revive to exist and thrive in today's environment. So having that on a 2-hitter with this champion is really, really good. It also grants an extra turn if this attack kills an enemy when Ankora is on the same team. This is 4-turn cooldown and then 20% more damage when booked. I think that kit from that A3 could actually technically have a lot of value depending on it's very conditional. That's the only thing that's a little weird. It's conditional upon the scaling of the enemy, but you really kind of can't control that outside of your ability to strip it with your team comp, or on the flip side of that, where you can't control the element, you can kind of prepare yourself enough to a point where you can have that 50% stack for the buffs on him. So your team comp can be positioned in a place to give you that extra element, but the enemy team, I guess that's more of a complementary damage output, whereas like the main bulk of this that you're looking for is the stack from what you can provide for your team. So look towards the things you can control, look at everything else that you can't control as an extra bonus from the kit. So you technically still benefit from it, so I view that as a W. But in terms of like the terrain of a fight, the enemy's buffs is going to be conditional upon what the enemy does, right? There are some teams that may not use any buffs, which is kind of weird because we're in a buff-heavy comp, but our meta, I would say right now, and that would be a little bit counterintuitive, but I do think that in the event you're going against something like that, you actually can benefit from it. So that's a W at the end of the day. All three of these abilities are actually really, really prominent. I find them to be very strong. So the multipliers are kind of the last little icing on the cake to make this guy really stand out amongst some of the more defined champions in today's meta. Now, Mantle of Undeath, which is his passive. It doesn't have a cooldown on it, so keep that in mind. This champion will receive 50% less damage when attacked by enemies, including bosses and their minions, out of their active turn. So does that mean like counterattacks, I believe? Or like effects that happen whenever it's not the enemy's turn? So when it's their active turn, you ain't got to worry about that 50% damaged intake. Because that wouldn't trigger. But if, like, say for instance, you get your turn and there's some kind of counterattack that happens as a byproduct of like maybe you doing a mastery proc, like maybe a counterattack because you did more than 25% of their HP or something like that, that would be mitigated by 50%. Then that's actually really good. But if it's just in general when it's outside of his turn, then that'd be busted, no? I'd have to get clarification on that passive because it seems like the wording is very, very weird. Out of their active turn, this champion will receive 50% less damage when attacked by enemies, including bosses and their minions, out of their active turn. So when they say there, is it Narses or is it the enemy? And I think it's the enemy is the way I'm reading this. We'll have to get clarification on it. But either way, still, damage mitigation just straight up is very, very strong. If White Queen and Ankora is on the same team, this champion will receive no damage when attacked by enemies out of their active turn. Okay, so it's the enemy's turns. So I think we look at like counterattacks as like a outlet for this. This effect does not apply against bosses and their minions. This champion's skills will also ignore shield and strengthen buffs. Oh. So not only like the A2 will do damage to people who have shield and strengthen buffs, but it will also ignore it anyways? Oh. That's huge. That's really huge. Oh my god. Okay, so like think for example another meta champion. And I know I'm talking about top end PvE, and I'll bring it back down to earth a little bit here. But champions like Necro, for example, who benefit tremendously of using ally protection, strengthen, and then more importantly the shield procs that you can get from his passive. 2 of the 3 of those are just straight up neutered. This champion is strong. This champion is strong from like a kit perspective. If his multipliers are anywhere near robust, this champion is actually going to be a contender in the top end side of PvP. Hot take. Of course, the ally HP in all battles by 33% is the aura. He's going to be complementing it, so you can use him as a lead aura champion. This champion is very strong. These duo champions in general are very, very top tier. I would say that in the grand scheme of things, I definitely think that individually they sound very good too as well. But I also think that you really do see them strive to that extra level of success when they're partnered together. But I do think that I consider this duo to be a very big success because with or without King Narses, Queen Ankora is solid. With or without Queen Ankora, Narses is solid. And that's one thing that I noticed that like some of the recent partners that we've been having in this game, like Kaja and Timid, for example, they do shine a little bit better. And even then, that's only to a certain point where they're solid when they're together. But when they're outside of each other or they're away from each other and they're by themselves, their performance is a lot more degraded. So if they're not already top tier when they're together, when they're separated, so you can feel like the battle of attrition or the battle of the course of a fight. You don't see the impact as strongly. Now, I do think that like Kaja, for example, between Timid and Kaja is the standout, believe it or not, and Timid is complementary to Kaja, but Timid by himself doesn't seem to have as much output as we would like, or maybe there's some arguments about how you would want to use him and where he would shine. Is very tumultuous to say it, but honestly, as a straight support and as a straight damage dealer for these 2 champions respectively, these are very, very good. This is very, very good kits, I think. Now, we talked a lot about PvP, and I kind of wanted to take this as a moment to kind of explain to you guys a mindset I have here. Depending on how the multipliers scale, the abilities from Narses that scale off of buffs and whatnot, if it's very comparable or at least comparable to something like Terrace's A3, which also scales off of the amount of buffs that are in play, This champion will be viable in content that in general from a damage outlet, because Terrace does do a lot of damage with his A3, making him a very suitable candidate for Hydra content. There's plenty of teams out there that fight at Nightmare, which is the top inside, where you can see Terrace exists as just a straight up DPS outlet for that team, right? And the control is the control is present from other champions or whatever the case may be. This guy could be an alternative to that if the multipliers are anywhere indicative of the same level and the same breadth as Terrace. I do think that the flip side of this, though, Ankora could kind of be viable everywhere. She has healing, she has buffing, she has debuff removal, she has revive, and then redirect for debuffs makes her a very suitable champion. On top of being an ally speed aura, makes her a very, very suitable champion across all content. So this is honestly a solid A tier, maybe even S tier support champion, in my opinion, because of the fact that she provides literally everything you need, everything a growing boy needs to be able to survive in the current terrain of today's meta, whether that's from a PvP or PvE standpoint. She's really, really good. But I do think that the biggest indicator about how solid the combo together is going to be is really going to be conducive to whether or not Narses has his damage multipliers. But his kit screams out, don't scoff at this guy. This guy is a king, and he's on his king grind. So we'll definitely have to see it. With that being said, let me know what you guys think. Are you guys going to go for this fusion? I do know that we are currently in the middle of like a lot of other events, and there's been a big fatigue in terms of resources for a lot of players. So we're very aware of that. From my point of view, and to be honest with you, we may need to hunker down and make sure that if there's ever a point where we need to make some decisions on what we're going to sacrifice in place of it, is this champion worth it? As of right now, I'm going to give this a seal of approval. I think the answer is yes. The Queen Ankora from a Fragment event is going to be worth going. If you're not finished with Faction Wars, let's bring it down a little bit more closer to like mid-game progression. If you are not done with your Faction Wars, or you haven't found the right solution to keep your team going from a Knights Revenant standpoint, this champion is going to do it for you. This champion will help you get to the finish line with your full team alive, hopefully. Now, in terms of damage output, if this guy has anywhere near of a value point in terms of his kit, or maybe even just in general as a legendary, this champion will probably be a good outlet for you to be able to do more in the Faction Wars standpoint too as well. And then, of course, if you're progging through early game progression and you so happen to get your access to one of these two champions, it's a no-brainer. They're going to help you prog and push ahead. I can easily see my free-to-play account, if I got Ankora or if I got Narses, I could see them both contributing towards the success of my account overall. So early game progression is a W. It's a strong W. It's almost like a quality of life, like just you're clear sailing, especially with the Queen. Mid game, I could see some big value in Faction Wars and maybe starting to dabble into like some more of the more harder difficulties of content, like Hydra, for example, which also is indicative of late game and then end game. As this guy has the right multipliers and the kit is lining up the way I'm seeing it, I can see this being a very big contender against the lightness of Mariska and Taurus, which means that it's like in-game viable from a PvP standpoint. Now, mind you, this is subjected to change once we get more information about how the multipliers look and all this other stuff, so just keep that in mind. My opinion is with the information I have right now. But as always, let me know, do you think I'm overhyping these champions? Do you guys think that it's underrated? Maybe we really need to look at this champion a little bit more in terms of value. Let me know in the comments below, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and always remember, stay ascended.